All right, here's the deal. We've got all of our calipers in place. We've got our flex lines already connected to them all the way around the street stop. The dual master cylinder system is in. We've got to plumb in all of the connections. We're going to start right here on this brake job by covering the parts and pieces we're going to use and the tools necessary. All right, let's get busy. So let's talk about parts and pieces here for a second. Now I've got some used pieces here that I'm using and some new. I've got some 3/16 brake line right here. Now this is just aluminized steel brake line. And so this is new. And then I've got like a used piece of 3/16 and a used piece of quarter. And as we go through builds through the years and everything, when I have a good piece of line that's not rusted out, hadn't been bent up or anything, I just save it. Save a little money on the next build if I need it. But I have got a 90-degree fitting that is 1/8 NPT that goes into the master cylinder. And then on this end, this is 7/16 24, which is what the 1/4 inch line will be, because I'm going to come out of the master cylinder with 1/4 inch line. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to split it to go between the right front and the left front, and I'm going to go from 1/4 inch down to 3/16. So I'm going to drop there. So let's talk about steel brake line for a second and working with it. There are really two different ways you can go about doing this. You can order steel brake lines pre-cut and inverted flares on the end with fittings and everything already like sized up 12 inches, 18, 24. So you could measure out everything and then just buy different lengths already made up, ready to go. You might not get the exact size you need, but the way that you end up bending all these lines around, and you'll see that in a second, it really doesn't matter because you can make the bend in a way that would use up the distance that you need. So that's one way of going about doing it. But the second option is if you're going to cut and re-flare the ends or one end of the line in order to make the links yourself. And that's the option that I have chosen in this last build. Now I've bought brake lines, like these brake lines that I have are probably pre-made lines, and you know, there's nothing wrong with that. It's a great way to do it. But I have gotten where that I do kind of some of my own stuff. I had some fittings, but I didn't have the inverted flare piece. So this is a new kit that I bought in order to do this car. And I wanted to show it to you right quick. It's really simple doing inverted flares. And it's just the second step of the inverted part is the only difference from just traditional flare where you drive into the end of it. So you're going to clamp on to the part. We'll see that in a minute. And then you're going to drive in the cone, you know, to do the center of it. And the only difference is that you've got an extra piece that's going to make the flare on the outside. And they call it inverted because it's going to have a shape on the inside and outside of the line. We'll get a close-up of that in a minute. But you got to have that if you're going to make your own links. And this kit right here can be real similar. It'll look just like this because it's the same thing, but it doesn't have these little pieces. And so that's just a flare kit, not an inverted flare kit. And that won't work for brake lines. You need the one that does both ends of it. So just be aware of that. So that kit, brake line bending device, just real simple. Like this one will do 180 degrees. It's got 3 different lanes for like a 3/16, a 1/4, and a 3/8 inch steel brake line. And of course it would do like a copper line or something as well. Let's see, and then a steel line cutter. So this cutter right here would cut any of your soft steel or copper lines, you know, from 3/16 up to like an inch or something without issue. You're gonna need one of these because you need to have that really perfect circle cut that roller is going to give you, because where you cut it becomes a part of that inverted flare that you're going to make. So it is important. I've already got my flex lines on here, and the first thing that we've got to do is we have got this tab that mounts this flex line where the brake line is going to fit. And so this tab right here is what's going to hold our brake line in place. And we've got to figure out where to mount that. So I looked at it right here. If I mounted it right there like that, then this line comes across right here. My spring's over here, my shock's over here. It's out of the way. And then what I do is I just take and say, well, if I turned it, what's it do? And of course, it's just going to come over this way. It's fine. and I'll turn around and I'll take and I'll say, well, all the way up, you know, when I'm all the way up, where is it going to be at? It's going to be up under that control arm, you know, all the way this way, all the way that way. And so it's a great spot. And so that's all I do, is I just take and I, you know, sit it up there, figure out the spot, where's it going to be. If it's a good spot, it's going to be clear of everything. And the only other thing to look at is you'd want to make sure that it didn't like bulge out and like so the wheel, you know, might be rubbing it, something like that. You know, if you ended up with a real long line, you might need to, according to how short a long line is, you may have to get further away to make sure that when you turn in and out, you don't bulge it way up here and then the wheel cut the line through. All right, so we're going to weld that on right there. That bad boy is on and ready to go. We've marked our front caliper right here, and what I'm thinking here is I'm going to come straight down on the inside of my firewall. Now keep in mind, there's a piece that's going to go here when we start doing our body. So I'm going to go on the inside down through here, and I think I'm going to come out, and where I'm going to come out is where my brake line can come and follow this frame around and then curl into it. So I'm going to put that fitting and I'm going to run it through, and I'm going to use where it screws into it as a way to capture it onto the firewall. We'll see that in a second. And we're going to put it just right below the master cylinder here. So nothing here's got to be really just perfect. But yeah, about right there. So now that I know where that's going to be, right here, instead of me just struggling, trying to figure out, like taking a tape measure and like exactly how much is it going to be, I'm just going to take and pull extra line, okay? So I'm just going to say, I know that I'm going to go from there all the way around. I'm going to be up here, and I'm going to make sure that I get it longer than what I need. And I'm going to say, way up here, right there, is at least 6 to 12 inches more than I need. All right, and I'm going to take and try to make sure it's just good and straight right there. And I'm going to cut it off. All right. So I'm going to cut it off right there on that mark. Now, when you use this cut-off wheel like this, take your time. When you get in contact with it, what you do is you just, every time you make a round, put like an 1/8 inch of turn, eighth of a turn, you know, just a little squeeze. You don't want to try to get it all at once, because all you'll do is crush it. You don't want to crush it. You want that to be a perfect circle. That's the reason you want to use one of these. And so I'm just giving it a little turn every time I go around it. And then it'll just break off here in just a second. Still going, and there it is, okay? And so now I've got a nice smooth end right there, okay? Now that we've done that, these lines are 3/16 is really easy to work with. You can bend it by hand fairly easy without kinking it, as long as you don't try to make a tight bend. You know, like if you're just trying to follow around a frame or whatever, you don't even need a bending device. You can just take and just mold it and work it. Now, a couple of things here. I know I'm going to get a lot of dirt and a lot of impact and stuff going on right there. So I know I want to be behind that. And I want to be on this frame rail. I don't want it to stick up and be hanging out like a line separate up in the air, because it's going to get dirt in between it. And then like somebody's helping me and they don't know the brake line's there and there's dirt all over it. And you know, they, like a young teenager or something, they got a mud scraper and they're just going to town. They're going to do the best job ever. And they collapse your brake line on you. So be a little particular about where you put these. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take and I'm going to be right here and to go right there. And so I'm just going to start forming it. So on this end, I'm gonna take my marker. I'm gonna be against the metal right there, because I want to be against the metal. I'm gonna mark where that would be in the back. So there's where my cut's gonna be. And I am going to take and put this end on and bolt it rigidly in there. And I'm gonna leave that like that until we put the fitting in. And then after we put the fitting in, I'll mark it, take it back loose, and put that end on. Boom, that's all it is to it. You see I got our block in the vise here, good and solid for us to work. Of course, we've got the 3/16 here on the end. Now the first question is, which do I do first, the regular flare or the inversion, and how high? Well, we do the inversion first. Now the inversion is the little black right here, and what it is it's doing that outside of it. It's got a little recess cone in there to do that. And what we've got to do is we've got to figure out how high up this line should stick in this. And there's probably an exact formula, but I know for these 3/16 and these quarters, I'm sticking it up about 1/8 of an inch, about 125 thousandths. And if it's 100, that's fine. Now on that quarter, I'll probably make sure it's up at least 125. But if you get it too tall, you've messed up, because it's going to roll it over outside of where it should be. And then that's not going to fit whenever you go to thread it on. If you didn't have it tall enough, it would pinch down and you just wouldn't have a good flared edge, and you could come up a little more and do it. But what I do is I just take and, all right, so that's 124, okay? Now you know if you don't have it tall enough, because if this sits down on there and it's just, this edge is just flat against it, well then obviously when you press it, it's not going to flare anything. Couple of things here to note. Of course, I'm going to tighten it up. I'm going to make sure that these two block sides are flat to each other. This is just an inexpensive one. This whole kit's like $25 is what it is. But make sure these are in alignment right here. Okay, I'm going to get it good and tight. Well, I should get the vise tight where it doesn't move. That would help. There we go. All right, so it's good and tight. All right, and when you cut this with this, you may get just a little bit of a swell in, and so like this cutter's got this clean out tool, and just, you just spin it on the end like that. You're not trying to drive out a flare, nothing like that. But anyway, and that way your little center pin will fit, okay? So that's on there. It has a cone in the middle, and that's because this flare end on this fits into that cone. All right, so we just back that up like that. And slide that over, and I'm going to drop that cone into that cone like that right there, and then I'm going to grab that driver pin. Okay, so how do we know when we're done here? Well, we're driving this inverted flare die down to this block. So when the two contact each other, that's it. It's not going to go any further. And what it'll have done is it will have pressed that end of that line into the form between the two. So that's how it works. So we're just going to take and just run that down. And you're going to feel it tighten up, In other words, it's going to deadhead against it, like right there, deadheaded. It didn't give anymore, so I knew I was down. So now I can back that up. And typically, that's going to be tight in the hole because you've squeezed that line. So the line is squeezed against the anvil in the middle as well. So I'm just going to give it a little twist. Give it a little rock there. See if I can't say, come out of there, baby. Now, if you were having trouble with this, unclamping it here would help, but then you're going to have to clamp it back up. But if you got concerned, you don't want to break the head off of your die there. All right. So now that's done, and this now the outside of it has been it's been rounded. It's got a rounded edge on it around the outside, but on the inside it doesn't yet. It's just a barrel hole in the middle, and so that inverted flare way that fits in, it still won't seal up. So now we're going to use it without the die, so just this cone, and so that's very important you do it in this order. It won't work the other way. All right, and so I'm going to go down. Now on this one, you could go too far. You could just keep going until you make the line actually split. So you got to use a little bit of feel here, but it's still, you're going to get that same effect. It's going to kind of tighten up. You know, you're going to know when you're there because it's going to, see, it kind of got tight on me. Well, it got tight whenever this cone had flattened the wall of the brake line out to that outside wall, and so the squish between them. And the difference is if I kept going, it would just take and start distorting, and then that brake line wall would split and rupture. Okay, so gotta have to pay a little attention on this one, but it's not bad. Okay, so that's done. Now, let me give you a word of warning, which you'll do it, I've done it, and all of us. I don't have a flare end on the other end yet, so it doesn't matter. I don't have to have the fitting in it yet, but I'm gonna bring a fitting over here. So you see the fitting, I slid the fitting up from the other end onto this. Make sure whenever you are doing the other end and you're doing the two ends, or if you can't slide this, if you had like a really tight bend or something and you could not slide this on, that you have got your ends on before you make that other flare. Otherwise, you're gonna have to cut it off and start over, new piece of line, whatever it takes. Now, on this flare right here, I want to show you this end. It's rounded on the outside, and then it's also wedged on the inside. And the way this system works, it has to have both of those in order to capture it. Because we're not dealing with, 50 or 100 pounds per square inch. We're dealing with anywhere from 1,500 pounds per square inch to 2,500 pounds per square inch. So hydraulic level pressure, and that's the reason that that's a requirement. I wanted to point one other thing out to y'all. You could use brass ferrules for an application like this, where that you've got a brass fitting that you're going to slide over this. It's a sleeve that goes over it, and then you've got a retainer and a nut that crunches that down. Personally, I have used them in the past. As my awareness of safety and everything has improved, I don't feel they're appropriate for me anymore. My concern with a brass ferrule system is two major things. One, the brass ferrule itself, if it is not bit into the steel, so if the steel itself does not distort and shrink around that brass, then under enough pressure, it could possibly push that entire brass ferrule and the captive nut up the line. I've never had it happen. I've always tightened them down enough that I feel like that they did bite into the steel, but it's a concern I have. The other concern I have is that the captive nut and the retainer, that when you tighten those down so tight, I have had that nut, which is typically brass, I have split one of those before, and so then I lost my bite, my pressure, and my seal because of that. So I don't think they're as effective. You can't tighten them down as much, and so for me, I got where I didn't trust them, and so I moved away from them. I had bought cars when I first started racing, and that's what they had on them, and so I was using it, and like I said, used it for years. It worked fine, but as I've worked with this stuff, I've realized that I've got some failure modes going on with those, that if you run this steel brake lines like they do from the factory for the cars and stuff, that you've got a lot better system here that can stand up to abuse over a long period of time, be taken apart, put it back together, and you can trust it. And so for those reasons, I suggest staying away from using any type of a slip over ferrule system. Okay, so we're gonna put this on, and then we're gonna work on that last piece with the T-block. All right, so it's important to figure out front and rear. Just be aware. Because what it is whether you're turning in or you're turning out. So if I turn my crank from my bias, I'm going to turn it in clockwise. When I do that, that's going to drive the bias toward this left side master cylinder. All right? And it's easy to figure it out because you can turn it in and out and then step on the pedal and see which one of the master cylinders it's pushing more according to which way. And so that's how you can keep up with that. But I like to turn my bias into the front and out to the rear. It just seems to make sense to me. Now, since this is MPT, we're going to put some Teflon tape on it. And let me go the right way where it doesn't unroll it when I put it in there. Okay. And make sure that you don't get any Teflon in the opening, because it can end up stopping up a line. Never had that happen, but I think it could do it. I think it could I think it very well could stop up a line if it got just right. And so I'm gonna put this in here, and I'm gonna point this fitting straight down, because I'm gonna run a line straight down and then out. I'm gonna put this in, tighten it up straight down, and it is right up against that firewall. And that's on purpose. When we built this car, I know this firewall looks all beat up, but I kind of fought with it a little bit back when we were doing all this, because this is metal. That's not aluminum, that's sheet metal there. But we wanted to get the firewall and everything all the way back into the foot box as much as possible, because this is all rear percentage that I'm driving for. And rear mounting, so if I had rear mount pedals and controls, that would have helped me shorten this box up some, so that would have been a good thing. But when you buy all of these assemblies new, they are, you know, it's very expensive stuff. And I had all of these, and so that's the reason. And I would suggest if you're building a car like this, and the box is just whatever you can make it, you know, if you're gonna have to buy these, or if you're sourcing them in a swap meet or something, and you can get the rear facing ones, it's gonna help you. And remember, any one thing you may not really show up on the scales, but it's just like the guys, like we was talking about, several of y'all, we've been talking about, you know, the wheel bearing spacers and like the pin finish on the bearings and different things. Any one thing doesn't win or lose a race. But it's naive to think that if you didn't do all of those little things, it would not make a big impact, because it would. Each and every one of them has merit. And so, like, if you could turn these forward or rearward, it has merit. You know, if you've got a choice, face them rearward. With me, I mean, it's a budget build, so it's all about using what's available. But yeah, I would face them the other way if I had the choice on it. Okay, so we're facing down right there. Now, this brake line, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna put a hard 90 as close as I can to the end. I'm gonna drill a hole, and then wherever that is up here, where that would be to cut off, I'm gonna cut it off, and then we're gonna flare the end of it so that we can stick it through the hole and have it come out right here. Hopefully perfect. Should be far enough. All right. You see I've got it bent here. Oh, I want to show you right quick. Do you see how I've got those extra threads right there? A lot of these pre-made are going to have this long fitting on one end. I like these because they don't hurt anything to use this anywhere. But through this firewall, we're going to take advantage of that to be able to capture it and squeeze it in the firewall. That'll make sense. Let's see if the holes... Yep, that's perfect. So what I'm going to do is I am going to stick that through that hole right there. All right. And then I'm going to turn around and I am going to mark where it is going to be through the end right there. Now, if I miss this by a little bit, let's say I miss this by a 1/4 inch, it's not the end of the world, because I can just take and put a little bit of a crook in this line, you know, or I could open the hole up, but the easiest thing to do would be just put a little bit of a crook in the line. It would take up that slack. What we don't want to be is short. Short would be a problem. And we could drill the hole a little bit bigger or notch the hole up to help with short, but short's a problem. All right, so our flares are in on both ends. Now, got a trick right here. And this is just how I do it, and I've done this a couple of times before. Put a washer, I think that's just a half or 3/8 washer. If that's a 3/8 washer, that's a 7/16 is the actual size there. So it's, you know, a 3/8 washer will actually be bigger. But anyway, fits over it good. Drop that one. All right, that is a piece of radiator hose that has been cut and a hole drilled through it right there. Piece of 3/8 radiator hose. All right, so there it is. Get that pushed down on there. And then another washer like that. And I'm going to tighten all of that up. And I like that long fitting because it's long enough that I get my bite, because the main thing is I want to get my bite into my block there, and that's the controlling thing. But this rubber right here will take up the slack and it'll stop the vibration, and it'll hold it in place, and it holds my block on the outside in place, so it works really, really great. So I like that. I like those long fittings for that reason, so let's put that in. Okay, let's see. That'll work. Oh yeah, oh yeah. Yeah, that works. That's nice. Okay. I'm not going to tighten that all the way up yet, because I might want to turn it. So now we've got our brake line here, and of course these fittings are the ones. Well, I got one already on there, so I wouldn't forget it. But so now that is going to sit right in there. And I've got some luxury here, because that can move back and forth probably a good ½ inch. So I'm not going to have a problem. I'm just going to mark it where it would fit in the bottom, about right there. And so we'll just take that brake line back off, cut it, flare it, and the left side is done. I'm going to show you on this line makeup, there's a little bit of a difference here. I want to make sure you notice. This end right here is the small fitting for 3/16, and it's 3/16 line, but the fitting I put on the end right here, that's at 7/16 24 outside threads for it, because I'm putting it into a 1/4 inch block instead of a 3/16. Well, when I do this, I have to make sure that that inverted flare right there is the full lip. I did it well and got enough material sticking up to get a big wide flange, because I'm going to seal up to a little bit bigger cone on that. So I don't want to miss it or have a little problem there with how that seals on to that bigger cone that it has to sit into. All right, so let's get that on. Now the alternative would be to get a T-block that is, 1/4 inch on one side, and then the two outfeed lines 3/16 on the other. I'm sure they make those and everything. They probably just cost more. But yeah, so I just do it like that right there, and then put that on. All right, that gets the left front. If you like what we're doing right here, go ahead and pause, hit that thumbs up button for us. Makes a huge difference, but don't run off. I've got all of these lines to run and everything. We'll wrap this video up in just a couple of minutes here, rapid style. So y'all stick around. Well, that took a minute, but we got them done and everything. Let's take a quick walk around the car, and then I want to show y'all what I use for my brake fluid. All right, so you can see here, all right, this is the right front right here. Of course, ran it the same way, tied it into a tab. You see I tied it down, and then what I did was I just ran it on the tube here and ran it around. Of course, I've got my cutoff switch on the side of the inside of the driver's compartment there, tied in. Of course, running back there. And then you can see the rear brakes is running a little bit different. So I'm coming out the side. I came through here. I do this on a lot, the steel lines and different things where I'm going to go through a firewall or something. I'll take a piece of fuel line and split it and put over it, and then I'll put a zip tie on each side of it to keep the fuel line from slipping back or forth. That works really good, y'all. You don't have to worry about rubbing a hole in anything by doing that. Whether it be wires or a fuel line, yeah, literally I'll put a bigger fuel line or a radiator hose over the top of a fuel line, whatever it is. But it's a good way to guard to keep a firewall or any type of a head from cutting that. So yeah, run that back. And so you see where I'm coming around here. It's not perfect. I just, worked it by hand. Made sure that I'm not like rubbing on any corners or rubbing it against any rivets. Nothing like that. Of course, this is just body aluminum that I bend over and I'm using for tabs to stop vibration, keep it from moving. This joint right here is because I already had these two pre-made pieces and it worked out on length great. But if I decided to put like a 2-pound resistor to hold 2 pounds of pressure on rear brakes, and I've done that in the past, I might do it on this car if I feel like I need it. And I can just put it right in here in place of that joint. So that's gonna work really good. Willwood makes that little 2-pound resistor. I really like that to keep rear brakes up and tight. And we can see here on the rear, let's see if I can get a shot here, and you can see where I'm coming across. Now this is just up in the air, totally up out of the way, but it's so rigid that I'm not gonna fix or secure it or anything. It's not gonna get hit by dirt where it's at. It's way above where the 9-inch pumpkin's gonna be, so I'm gonna leave it. I think it's fine. And then it's off of my frame just a little bit, so that's gonna work good, because if I decide to put a residual pressure holder, if I decide to put that in, that thing's about 1.5 inches, 2 inches long, so I've got a little room behind there so that'll work. Now, let's talk about these rear lines, the way I ran them. And I want you to look, see how I run, and I'm going across forward over the rear end, and then I'm hooking in, in front of this rear end right here. Well, that's a good way to run this, because the line is going in a direction with the control arms. So as I go up or down, instead of this line having to be long and like being connected up here and it coils up and then uncoils, that's gonna give it to slack where it could get pinched. But like this, it stays kind of laid out and then it's just angling up and down. So that's a good way to run it, is to go forward with that line and hook on. Instead of, I see sometimes people run the line straight up like this and hook onto the frame. I don't like that as much. All right, so let's talk about brake fluid for a second. I have found that I've been using this for the last couple of years, and this is Pentacin Super 4 brake fluid. And I think what this stuff is for, I think it's for like European cars like Mercedes and BMWs and stuff, but ounce for ounce, what this stuff does and its boiling point for the price compared to anything else on the market, I'm very, very happy with it. This is a liter, which is just a hair over a quart. It's about $18 on Amazon. I'll put a link to it on the website. Check us out, dirtracelife.com. Hey, we got swag, shirts, all that stuff. Throw that in there. But anyway, all right, so this stuff, like $18 for a quart. It's got a 509-degree Fahrenheit dry boiling point and 329-degree Fahrenheit wet boiling point. Now, if you don't know the difference between dry and wet, if the system was perfectly sealed and there was no moisture anywhere, then the boiling point of that brake fluid would be the dry point. If there was any moisture, any water anywhere in it, then the brake fluid where that water contamination existed could be as low as 329 degrees Fahrenheit. So that's the difference between dry and wet. Now in racing, we're typically going to change fluid out, every year, service that system, keep it sealed. And so, you're going to be on the dry end of that scale, but it's something to consider. Now, how does that stack up to other brake fluids? Well, if you're just using .3 and you're down at like a 350 degree dry boiling point, then you can have problems with brake fade. You get in a long race, you're consistently working your brakes for like real dry track, really leaning on your brakes a lot. And we're talking about dirt racing. Of course, asphalt, they know all about this. But you know, brakes can start fading because that boil off is happening at your calipers, and that's creating vapors inside your system. It's just like having air in your brake lines. It's not a good thing. So it can get really important. Now they have, like, Willwood has got a .3 brake fluid that's got like a 530-degree dry boiling point. So this stuff's right up there with it. But you know, like 12 ounces is the same price as this is for a quart. And so that's something to consider. One other thing you want to think about is .3 and .4 are like a similar type of a compound that is compatible. When I say compatible, I've never poured one in on top of the other, but the type, like for example, the calipers, seals, you know, your master cylinder and all of that, it's all compatible with, you know, anything that'll work for .3, the fluid, it's compatible with .4 as far as the rubbers and stuff go. Of course, now, like when I switched over to this, I drained all my system and everything. I didn't want the two fluids contaminated. But my understanding is .5, that's not the case. If you have .5 parts that require .5, that's a very different thing. So really want to research that, y'all, before you start switching around. But I've had really good luck with this Super 4 in running, you know, with, like I said, I've got Avco calipers there. I've run Willwood calipers in the past, stock stuff, Willwood master cylinders. Great success with this. I use it in my clutch, master cylinder, everything. Never have encountered any problems with fade from really hot brakes. Oh, and as far as, of course, I'm gonna bleed all these out and do that, but I strictly use a vacuum pump for this. These are really inexpensive. Like this is a Harbor Freight model. I think these things are like less than $30. I'll see if I can link one up. But this is the easiest way. When you get into these really long lines, and I wanted to point that out, like this long line for this cutoff for the right front right here, and it goes, you know, down and then up and through, you know, through this hydraulic valve and back down. And when you're pumping the pedal, you know, you can run into a problem if you're not moving the fluid very fast and keeping it going, where that you've got air bubbles that keep wanting to return back up to this top higher part of the line and all that. And this gets into like running lines, you know, you want to run them all in one direction. That helps the air to move out of them. But you can't really do that in some of these situations. Well, the vacuum pump, where you pull a vacuum at the caliper and pull the fluid through, you're pulling the fluid so consistently, and it'll carry all that air and everything with it. And so you can get the system bled completely of all of the air bubbles a lot quicker using one of these. So if you haven't got one, you can get your hands on one, I would suggest them. All right, so that wraps us up. I've got to go ahead now and get the engine and transmission in this thing. We're gonna get it back down on the ground, and we're gonna start body work. All right, I'll see y'all in the next video.